The morning sun cast long shadows across our family farm as I made my usual rounds, checking the irrigation canals. These waterways were the lifeblood of our operation, carrying precious water to our crops during the dry season. I'd walked this route thousands of times over the past 15 years, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to find. As I approached the main canal near the eastern pasture, I heard something unusual, a desperate splashing sound that didn't belong. The water typically flowed smoothly and quietly, so any disturbance caught my attention immediately. I quickened my pace, thinking perhaps a piece of debris had gotten caught in the flow. What I saw made me stop dead in my tracks. There, struggling against the concrete sides of the canal, was a bobcat. The wild cat was clearly exhausted, her powerful legs churning the water as she fought to keep her head above the surface. Her spotted coat was soaked, and I could see the panic in her golden eyes as she clawed desperately at the smooth concrete walls. My first instinct was to step back. Bobcats were dangerous predators, and even a drowning one could seriously injure someone trying to help. But as I watched her struggle, something deeper than caution took over. This magnificent creature was going to die if I didn't act quickly. The canal walls were about 4 feet high, and the water level was just low enough that she couldn't reach the top edge. She'd probably fallen in during the night while hunting and had been fighting for her life ever since. Time was running out, and I was her only hope for survival. I ran back to the barn and grabbed a thick horse blanket and a pair of heavy work gloves. My heart was pounding as I returned to the canal. The bobcat was still there, but her movements were becoming weaker. I knew I had only minutes before exhaustion would claim her. Kneeling at the edge of the canal, I spread the blanket out beside me. The plan was simple but risky. Wrap her in the blanket to protect both of us, then lift her out quickly. I'd handled plenty of farm animals over the years, but never anything quite like this. "Easy, girl," I whispered, though I doubted she could hear me over her own splashing. I lowered the blanket into the water, trying to get it underneath her. She hissed and tried to swipe at me, but her movements were sluggish from exhaustion. On my third attempt, I managed to wrap the blanket around her body. She was heavier than I expected, probably around 30 pounds of solid muscle. As I lifted her from the water, she let out a low growl that sent chills down my spine. For a moment, I wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. I set her down gently on the grass about 10 feet from the canal edge, then quickly stepped back. I expected her to bolt immediately, disappearing into the brush like any wild animal would. Instead, something extraordinary happened. She lay there for a moment, sides heaving, water dripping from her fur. Then she looked directly at me with those piercing golden eyes, and I swear I saw something that looked almost like gratitude. Most wild animals, once freed from danger, flee as quickly as possible. It's pure instinct. Get away from the human and back to safety. But this bobcat was different. She remained on the grass, watching me with an intensity that was both unnerving and fascinating. I stayed perfectly still, not wanting to spook her into running before she'd fully recovered. Her breathing was still labored, and I could see she was exhausted from her ordeal in the canal. Occasionally, she would shake her head, sending droplets of water flying from her ears. After about 10 minutes, she slowly got to her feet. I held my breath, expecting her to disappear into the nearby woods. Instead, she took a few tentative steps toward me. Every instinct told me to back away, but something kept me rooted in place. She stopped about 6 feet away and sat down, continuing to study me with those remarkable eyes. It was as if she was trying to figure out what kind of creature would risk its own safety to help her. I found myself equally curious about her behavior. "You're welcome," I said softly, feeling somewhat foolish for talking to a wild predator, but her ears twitched at the sound of my voice, and she tilted her head slightly, almost like a house cat might do. We stayed like that for nearly an hour, two unlikely companions sharing a moment of mutual respect. The sun climbed higher, warming both of us as we maintained our strange standoff. Finally, she stood up, gave me one last long look, and padded silently into the tall grass. I thought that would be the end of our encounter. 3 days passed before I saw her again. I'd been thinking about our encounter constantly, wondering if she'd fully recovered and made it back to wherever bobcats make their homes. I'd even found myself checking the canal more frequently, though I told myself it was just routine maintenance. I was repairing a section of fence near the spot where I'd rescued her when I heard a soft rustling in the grass behind me. I turned around slowly, and there she was, sitting about 20 feet away, watching me work. She looked much better than she had 3 days earlier. Her coat had dried to a beautiful tawny color with distinct black spots, and her movements seemed fluid and confident again. But what struck me most was that she deliberately sought me out. I continued working on the fence, occasionally glancing in her direction. She remained perfectly still, like a statue carved from stone. When I moved to a different section of fence, she followed at a distance, always maintaining that 20-foot buffer between us. This pattern continued for the entire morning. I'd work, she'd watch. I'd move, she'd follow. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced with a wild animal. Most creatures either avoided humans entirely or became aggressive when they felt their territory was invaded. When I finally headed back to the house for lunch, she followed me halfway across the pasture before stopping at the edge of the tree line. I turned back to look at her one more time, and she was still sitting there, watching me go. That evening, I found myself looking forward to seeing her again the next day. Over the next 2 weeks, our daily encounters became routine. She would appear sometime during my morning rounds and follow me at a respectful distance as I went about my work. I started talking to her, sharing my thoughts about the weather, the crops, and life on the farm. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" I'd say, and her ears would perk up at the sound of my voice. Sometimes she'd respond with a soft chirping sound that I learned was how bobcats communicate when they're not feeling threatened. Gradually, the distance between us began to shrink. 20 feet became 15, then 10. I never tried to approach her directly, letting her set the pace for our developing relationship. Trust, I'd learned from years of working with animals, couldn't be rushed. One morning, I was sitting on a fallen log eating my lunch when she did something that took my breath away. She approached to within 5 feet of me and lay down in the grass. Her body relaxed and her eyes half closed. For a wild predator to show such vulnerability around a human was extraordinary. I remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. She stayed there for nearly an hour, occasionally opening her eyes to check on me, but otherwise appearing completely at ease. When she finally got up to leave, she stretched like a house cat and gave me what I could only describe as a contented look. That night, I realized our relationship had crossed a threshold. She wasn't just tolerating my presence anymore. She was actively seeking out my company. The question was, why? As our friendship deepened, I began to learn more about bobcat behavior and communication. I discovered that the soft chirping sounds she made were actually a sign of contentment and social bonding. When she was alert to potential danger, her ears would swivel independently, constantly monitoring our surroundings. She had a territory that encompassed about 50 acres of our farm, and I began to understand her daily patterns. Early morning was hunting time, when she'd disappear into the dense brush along the creek. Midday was for resting in the shade of the old oak trees. Evening brought another hunting session before she'd settle in for the night. What fascinated me most was her intelligence. She seemed to understand that I posed no threat and had even begun to use my presence to her advantage. When crows would mob her, cawing and diving aggressively, she'd move closer to me, knowing they wouldn't approach a human. I started calling her Luna, Though I had no idea if she was actually female, the name just seemed to fit her mysterious nocturnal nature. Whether she understood it as her name or simply recognized it as a sound I made specifically for her, she would always look at me when I said it. One afternoon, Luna did something that completely changed my understanding of our relationship. I was working near the creek when I heard her make a sound I'd never heard before. A low, urgent call. When I looked up, she was staring intently at something in the tall grass, her body tense with alertness. Following her gaze, I spotted the distinctive diamond pattern of a rattlesnake coiled just a few feet from where I'd been about to step. The rattlesnake was perfectly camouflaged among the dried grass and fallen leaves. If Luna hadn't alerted me, I would have walked right into striking distance. My heart pounded as I slowly backed away from the venomous snake, which seemed as surprised to see me as I was to see it. Luna remained perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the rattler until it finally slithered away into the brush. Only then did she relax, looking at me with what I interpreted as concern. It was a moment that fundamentally changed how I viewed our relationship. She hadn't just warned me out of instinct or coincidence. She had deliberately protected me from danger, just as I had saved her from drowning in the canal. We were no longer just two creatures sharing space. We were partners looking out for each other. "Thank you, Luna," I said, and she responded with that soft chirping sound I'd grown to love. From that day forward, I felt a deeper sense of responsibility toward her. She'd proven that our bond was mutual, and I was determined to be worthy of her trust. I began bringing small offerings when I came to work in her territory. Not food, which could make her dependent, but interesting objects I thought might stimulate her curiosity. A colorful feather, an unusual stone, a piece of driftwood from the creek. She would investigate each item carefully, sometimes carrying them to different locations around her territory. Our communication became more sophisticated too. I learned to recognize her different vocalizations and body language. A quick tail flick meant she was mildly annoyed. Ears flat against her head indicated she was feeling threatened by something I couldn't see, and that gentle chirping always meant she was content with my presence. As autumn arrived, I worried about how the changing season would affect our friendship. Would Luna migrate to a different territory? Would the approaching winter drive her to seek shelter far from the farm? My concerns proved unfounded as she adapted her routines, but continued to seek out my company daily. The cooler weather seemed to energize her. Her coat grew thicker and more luxurious, and her hunting became more successful. I'd occasionally find the remains of rabbits or squirrels near the places where we spent time together, though I never witnessed her actual hunting. Winter brought new challenges and deeper trust. During a particularly harsh, cold snap, I found Luna huddled in a makeshift shelter she'd created under a pile of fallen branches. She was shivering, and for the first time since our initial meeting, she looked vulnerable. I went back to the barn and returned with an old horse blanket, not the same one I'd used to rescue her, but similar. I approached slowly and laid it near her shelter, then backed away. She watched me carefully, then cautiously investigated the blanket. To my amazement, she dragged it into her shelter and arranged it to her liking. For the rest of that cold spell, she used the blanket regularly. It was another milestone in our relationship. She'd accepted help from me beyond that first desperate rescue. Spring brought renewed energy and what I could only describe as playfulness. Luna began bringing me gifts, not prey, but interesting objects she'd found during her travels. A piece of colorful glass worn smooth by the creek, an unusual seed pod, even a small antler shed by one of the deer that frequented our property. Not everyone understood or approved of my friendship with Luna. When word got around the local farming community about my pet Bobcat, reactions ranged from curiosity to outright concern. Some neighbors worried about the safety of their livestock, while others questioned the wisdom of encouraging a wild predator to remain in the area. I had to explain repeatedly that Luna wasn't a pet and that I wasn't feeding her or trying to domesticate her. Our relationship was based on mutual respect and trust, not dependence. She remained completely wild, hunting her own food and maintaining her natural behaviors. The local wildlife officer paid me a visit after receiving several calls from concerned neighbors. I was nervous about the meeting, worried that I might be forced to somehow drive Luna away. Instead, the officer was fascinated by what I described and asked if he could observe our interactions. When Luna appeared during his visit, maintaining her usual respectful distance while clearly comfortable with my presence, the officer was amazed. He'd never seen anything like it in his 20 years of wildlife management. After observing us for several hours, he concluded that our relationship was beneficial rather than harmful. She's learned to coexist with humans without losing her wild nature, he told me. That's actually valuable for her species' long-term survival. His endorsement helped quiet the neighborhood concerns, but it also made me more aware of the responsibility I carried. Luna and I weren't just friends, we were ambassadors for the possibility of peaceful coexistence between humans and wildlife. This realization deepened my commitment to understanding and protecting not just Luna, but the entire ecosystem she was part of. As our second year together began, I started documenting Luna's behaviors more systematically. I kept a journal of our interactions, noting her seasonal patterns, communication methods, and the gradual evolution of our relationship. What emerged was a picture of remarkable intelligence and emotional complexity. Luna had developed what could only be called routines around my presence. She knew my schedule better than some humans did, appearing at the right times and places to intercept my daily rounds. She'd learned to distinguish between my work clothes and my town clothes, showing little interest when I was dressed for errands, but always appearing when I was ready for farm work. Her territorial behavior was equally fascinating. She'd established what I came to think of as our spaces, areas where she was most comfortable interacting with me. These included the spot where I'd first rescued her, a clearing near the old oak grove, and a sunny hillside where we'd often spend quiet afternoons together. But perhaps most remarkably, she began including me in her natural behaviors. When she discovered a new water source during a drought, she led me to it, chirping and looking back to make sure I was following. When she found evidence of other predators in her territory, she would alert me with specific vocalizations I learned to recognize. One afternoon, she did something that left me speechless. I was sitting in our usual spot when she approached closer than ever before, close enough that I could have reached out and touched her. Instead of touching, though, she simply sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. We sat like that for over an hour, two very different creatures sharing a moment of perfect peace and understanding. The ultimate test of our relationship came during Luna's second winter with me. I'd noticed she was moving more slowly than usual and seemed to be favoring her left front paw. When I got a closer look, I could see she had a significant injury, what appeared to be a deep cut on her pad, possibly from stepping on broken glass or sharp metal. The wound was clearly infected and causing her considerable pain. In the wild, such an injury could be fatal, either from the infection itself or from her inability to hunt effectively. I knew I had to help, but I also knew that any attempt to treat her would test the limits of our trust. I consulted with a veterinarian friend who specialized in wildlife rehabilitation. She agreed to make a house call, bringing the necessary supplies to clean and treat the wound. The challenge would be getting Luna to cooperate with the treatment. When the vet arrived, I led her to the spot where Luna and I usually met. Luna appeared as expected, but she was clearly wary of the stranger. She maintained a much greater distance than usual and seemed ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. I sat down in my usual spot and began talking to Luna in the calm, reassuring tone she'd grown accustomed to. Gradually, she relaxed and moved closer, though she kept a careful eye on the veterinarian. "This is incredible," the vet whispered. "I've never seen a wild bobcat behave like this." The treatment itself was a delicate dance of trust and patience. Luna allowed me to examine her injured paw, though she tensed when I touched the wound. When the vet began cleaning it, Luna growled softly, but didn't try to escape. The wound treatment was successful, but it required follow-up care that would test our relationship even further. Luna needed antibiotic treatments for several days, and the wound had to be kept clean and monitored for signs of infection. I created a comfortable space for her in one of the unused horse stalls in the barn, leaving the door open so she could come and go as she pleased. To my amazement, she chose to stay, seeming to understand that this was part of her healing process. During those days of recovery, our bond deepened in ways I hadn't thought possible. Luna allowed me to clean her wound daily, though she clearly didn't enjoy the process. She would grip my arm gently with her teeth, not biting, but holding on for comfort during the uncomfortable procedures. The veterinarian visited twice more, each time marveling at Luna's cooperative behavior. "She trusts you completely," she told me. This level of trust between a wild predator and a human is almost unheard of. As Luna's paw healed, I watched her test it carefully, gradually putting more weight on it as the pain subsided. Her natural caution and intelligence were evident in how she managed her recovery, never pushing too hard, too fast. On the 5th day, she was ready to return to her normal territory. I opened the stall door that morning, expecting her to leave immediately. Instead, she approached me and did something she'd never done before. She rubbed against my leg, just like a house cat might do. It was a gesture of pure affection and gratitude that brought tears to my eyes. Then, she walked calmly out of the barn and back to her wildlife, though she continued to visit me daily as before. As I write this, Luna and I have been companions for over 3 years. Our relationship has become a source of wonder, not just for me, but for the wildlife researchers and animal behaviorists who have come to study our unique bond. Several universities have documented our interactions, contributing to a growing understanding of wildlife intelligence and adaptability. Luna has taught me that the line between wild and domestic isn't as clear as we often assume. She remains completely wild, hunting her own food, maintaining her territory, and exhibiting all the natural behaviors of her species. Yet she's also demonstrated a capacity for friendship and trust that challenges our assumptions about predator-human relationships. Our story has inspired changes in how our local community views wildlife. Instead of seeing bobcats and other predators as threats to be eliminated, more people are learning to appreciate them as intelligent creatures capable of coexistence. Several neighboring farms have adopted wildlife-friendly practices, creating corridors and habitats that benefit the entire ecosystem. I've also learned about the responsibility that comes with such a relationship. Luna's trust in me extends to a certain trust in humans generally, which could put her at risk if she encounters someone with harmful intentions. I've had to become an advocate for her safety and for wildlife protection in our area. The most profound lesson Luna has taught me is about the possibility of communication across species barriers. We may not share a common language, but we've developed a deep understanding based on respect, patience, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Today, as I walk the familiar paths of our farm, Luna still appears beside me like a shadow made of sunlight and spotted fur. She's older now, moving with the dignity of a mature predator who has learned that not all humans are enemies. Our friendship has become a living testament to the possibility of harmony between human and wild. People often ask me what I've gained from this extraordinary relationship. The answer is simple: perspective. Luna has shown me that intelligence, loyalty, and affection aren't uniquely human traits. She's demonstrated that wild animals are individuals with personalities, preferences, and the capacity for complex emotions. Our bond has also taught me patience and the value of quiet observation. In our hurried human world, we rarely take time to truly watch and listen to the natural world around us. Luna has been my teacher in the art of stillness, showing me how much can be communicated without words. As I look toward the future, I know that Luna won't be with me forever. Bobcats typically live 8 to 10 years in the wild, and she was already mature when we first met. But the impact of our friendship will last far beyond her lifetime. I've documented our story not just for the scientific community, but for anyone who believes in the possibility of peaceful coexistence with wildlife. Luna has proven that with respect, patience, and genuine care, even the most unlikely friendships can flourish. She's changed how I see the world, and I hope our story might change how others see the wild creatures that share our planet. In saving Luna from that irrigation canal, I thought I was simply helping a drowning animal. Instead, I discovered a friendship that has enriched my life beyond measure. Thank you for listening to Luna's story and mine. It's been an incredible journey, and I'm grateful to have been able to share it with you. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let me know what part of the world you're listening from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories about the amazing relationships possible between humans and wildlife. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most extraordinary friendships come from the most unexpected encounters.